Hey everybody, it's Adi Shakoye here from Agile TV at the Agile Development and Better Software Conference in Boston. And right now I'm with Jennifer Bonine. How you doing?
Wonderful. It's been a really great event.
It has been, so one of the things I really enjoy about coming to events like this, you learn so much, not just from the speakers, but also from speaking to the people attending, because obviously you've got hundreds and hundreds of people from various companies around the world, and they're all got different challenges and constraints and different situations, and there's so much to learn.
Absolutely. And what I find now is interesting, building on that point is, the amount of collaboration that takes place, because a lot of times we get stuck in, working just with the organization we work for.
Yep.
And there is so much that goes on when you actually get outside of that organization and learn from others and ask questions. And even if they're not in the same industry, we all face similar challenges at a root level. Mm-hmm. And it's nice to have those opinions and those ideas. And it's been interesting to see in that space also corporations taking up the idea of, rather than thinking we have to solve all the problems internally, putting out those contests. Have you seen those contests where they'll bring people together?
Yep.
And they'll allow them to have teams, and they'll provide prizes to solve challenges on where are they going with their product, or what's the next thing, and really bringing in that experience from people outside the organization.
Great. And now one of the things I want to speak to you about, which is a common theme that we're hearing across this conference, is in regards to organizational change. But before we touch into that, for those people out there who are watching this right now who might not be familiar with all the work that you're doing, could you just quickly give us a brief introduction to who you are and your background, please?
Absolutely. So I started my career doing consulting.
Okay.
So I started with Accenture implementing large software solutions for companies. And then from there ended up going into biotech and then retail, so a couple different industries. And the last 8 years spent my career at Oracle, which I'm proud to say is the #2 largest software company right now. They were #3, but IBM had a bad quarter, so they're now #2. And what I did the last 2 years was work with the C-suite executives that run Oracle products and help them with strategies on, what's the next thing, how do I put that into my organization, how do I know what the right changes are to make, how do I know if it fits what we need to do, and a planful way to go about doing those things. So the last 2 years has really been with corporate leaders around where their minds are at, what some of their current challenges are that they're facing, and how to help them overcome those.
I mean, I think that's a great point that you raised there when you started talking about the right fit. Now, obviously over the last few years, we've seen a lot of people appear to be jumping on the Agile bandwagon. Now, how does an organization actually take stock of where it's at, and the leaders make a decision as to whether this really is for them, and really, are they really committed to making the changes that are required to make Agile really work?
Yeah, and I think that's so interesting, because I was having a conversation with a leader who said, we really need to do Agile. We need to do this, our organization needs it, and turned around and said in the next breath, but I want to make sure that I know what everyone's doing on a quarterly basis. You have planned milestones, I have guaranteed deliverables every quarter, and tell me for the next 18 months what you're going to do for me. So they want both.
Yes.
It's almost like saying, I want the planfulness of what I used to get with my waterfall, or I thought I got of that security blanket, but do it better and faster and cheaper for me and make it Agile. So they're really having to make that transition to, how do I actually shift the mindset of what I'm getting and how that's going to work for me as an organization. I also say the risk right now, I think, with a lot of companies is they'll go out and get the training, which is the academic portion of how to do it, but then they're not using the right coaches to come in and say, how does this actually fit in my environment? Because there's a difference between the academic version of something and the practical application. And where I think we're falling down is how to tweak it to fit your culture and the practical application. So what I always teach in my change classes is around, it's very important to understand your corporate culture. And does your corporate culture align to the change you're trying to make? Because at the end of the day, culture always wins over the change. And unless you're willing to start to make a change to the culture, that change, while it may take hold in certain areas or pockets, won't be fully adopted in the company or the organization.
And I think that highlights a great point, which I'm hoping you'll talk a little bit more about as well, which is that although a lot of teams are having success or a lot of companies are having success with Agile at the team level, but when we now start trying to roll it out across the organization, which involves the cultural side of things, which involve the political environments that it's in as well, the success, well, to be quite frank, a lot of people are not succeeding with that. And unfortunately, even though management's like, well, yeah, you guys do this Agile stuff, you go off and do it, it's like they see themselves totally separate from that. But like you've mentioned there, it's a cultural thing, and therefore leadership, I'm assuming, needs to be involved a lot more in helping to make that change, right?
Absolutely. So I would say leadership has to understand fundamentally, so if you're making a change, addressing head on, what is your culture? And what is your corporate culture? What is your team culture? What is your product culture? And that varies. So understanding what those things are and being real about what it is. And then when you say we're going to Agile, how does that fit? And what changes are we going to want to make to culture? And in order to incent people to change behavior, you have to have something that says, I'm going to get rewarded and recognized for changing my pattern, changing my behavior. Because whether we like it or not, we're all very creatures of habit.
True.
I do a thing in my class around change where I'll ask, how much do you like change? And these are people who are in a class to learn about it and say, I love change. I'm a change agent. They'll come into the room, select a seat in the room of, 50 or 75 people. I'll say, okay, now you're going to change your seat. Go pick a new one. You would not believe the looks I get. Like you just took away something that was very personal to me. So we think about how attached someone can get who says they like change to a chair in a room that they got less than an hour ago. Now you talk about telling someone, now change how you do your job that you've done for 10, 15, 20 years. Imagine how much more attached they are to that than a chair in a room that they just got.
Especially if we're thinking about leadership, people who tend to be in senior management roles, they've put in a lot of time over many years.
Absolutely.
And what's worked for them has got them to where they are. And we're now saying to them, okay, forget all that, let's do it differently.
Yeah.
There's a lot of risk for them, right? A position, and then when we start looking at the personal side of it, their position might be tied to their self-image, it might be tied to the financial rewards that they get, the mortgage, the everything else. So that's a big ask, right?
It is. It's how a lot of people define themselves. It's intertwined. So you're asking them to change a lot and to take a huge risk. So it's identifying that up front, being honest with what that change is, and helping people work through it, and dealing with it openly and honestly in organizations.
Which is the transparency side of things as well, I guess. We know that it's important to have transparency in our Agile development processes, but we also need to make sure that we're transparent around everything else. And what I'm also taking from that is that we also need to accept that we need to help them to minimize their risk, but accept that change might take some time, right?
Absolutely. And what we find in leadership, what's also interesting is leaders often will be talking or thinking about something for a while in the leadership group. So there may be months and months of meetings on something. All of a sudden they'll have a giant meeting with the entire organization and say, we're going to do this. And expect those people to be on board right away. Because to them, they've been talking about it for months.
Fair enough.
And it's an old concept. So what I encourage leaders to do, besides understanding the time it takes to transform, is understanding the time it will take your organization when you first give it to them, to remember that it's as new to them as it was to you 6 months ago when you started talking about it, and that it took them 6 months to get there. It's going to take your team some time too, to adjust and adapt and not expect it to happen overnight. Because we sometimes forget, when it's not new to us, we go, I've been talking about this for 6 months. Why is this a hard concept? To them, it's brand new.
It's true, and I think that's a great way to wrap things up, because I think it highlights the fact that sometimes the leaderships who do get engaged also tend to communicate it to the organization in a way which it feels like it's mandated. You must do this, and like you're saying, you're not even giving them the time that they've taken to actually adapt and understand, and we're not providing the reasons as to why we think it's a good thing, and even giving them an opportunity to maybe contribute to that, which might help to roll it out and help the organization to achieve its objectives a lot easier.
Absolutely.
Thank you. You've provided so much value, and I'm sure there's loads of people who are watching this right now who would like to find out a bit more about what you do, your services. So where can they find that information?
We actually have a website that provides information on a lot of what I've talked about. So it's www.tapqa.com. agileinsight.com.
Cool.
Thank you.
Well, thank you ever so much for your time. Really appreciate that, Jennifer. So there you go, guys. Once again, you hear it's about leadership. It's also about thinking about the people side of things, you know, and making sure that we try to engage as many people as possible, but give people time to deal with the change. Let's understand really fundamentally what's underneath, what's their concerns are, and do our best to alleviate those concerns and helping them to see why change is in their best interest. Ali Shakoya, Agile TV at the Agile Development Better Software Conference. Take care.